everyone, welcome to 21st Century Disciples. My name is Brian Edgar. I'm the lead theologian. I'm the only person in the ministry right now. Hopefully that will change at some point in time. We'll have to see how that goes. We've been going through a series about God's redemptive story through the Bible, and this meeting we are going into the last month and a half that Jesus was here on earth. And that's assuming that he hasn't come back in any way, shape, or form yet. Obviously, he hasn't come back in the way the Bible describes yet. So, anyway, this is basically from Peter's confession to his denial, from Christ's arrest through his trials, onto his crucifixion, death, burial, and resurrection, completing with his ascension. Little something I typed up. What do you think about it? Like it? Yay? Nay? Anyway, I would like to start off by talking about timing. Something that I think a lot of people don't take into account when they're talking about the Bible, either in a good way or a bad way, but specifically in a bad way, is the timing of things. A lot of history is painted with really large, broad strokes, right? And the Gospels start off kind of the same way. They talk about his birth, and then Luke gives something from when he was 12. But there's a lot of age variance there. And then, of course, there is the gap from 12 up to his starting ministry, which was about 30 years or so of age. And then, of course, his ministry is 3 years, based off of the number of Passovers mentioned in the Gospel of John, something that I may touch on if I end up going through the books, one at a time at some point. And then the last week or so gets a little bit more detailed, and then the last night and day really get detailed. There's a lot of the story there. Now, of course, there's other parts in the Gospels where Jesus is talking to somebody or something specific is going on, and there's some details given. But there's also some very large strokes in here. Very large brush strokes. So, yeah, let's go on with that. Now, timing again still. God's timing is impeccable, right? And there's a few things we can see in this. First of all, this is just before the Passover, which ties us back into the Exodus. And we remember the blood of the Lamb, and John the Baptist called Jesus the Lamb of God. They also ate the lamb at the Passover feast, which the communion, we represent Jesus' body and blood with the bread and the grape juice or the wine, depending on what your church does. And Jesus did talk about, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. He didn't mean it literally, of course. But again, this just all ties into the Passover and representing God's timing and God's plan here. There's also Romans 5:6, where it says, "For while we were still helpless, at the appropriate moment, Christ died for the ungodly." The important part there being at the appropriate moment. That is God's timing. God did what he did when he did it for a reason. And the same can be said for various things going on in our lives. Now we have, at the beginning here, Peter's confession of Jesus as the Messiah. I don't know that this necessarily took place within that last month and a half of Jesus' life, but it's definitely towards the end of the ministry. And basically we have it here in Matthew 16:13 through 20, which I would like to read. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." "But you," he asked them, "who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus responded, "Simon, son of Jonah, you are blessed because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. And I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the forces of Hades will not overpower it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth is already bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth is already loosed in heaven." And he gave the disciples orders to tell no one that he was the Messiah. Now there's a few things here to discuss. The people were saying, well, you're John the Baptist, you're Elijah, you're Jeremiah, you're another prophet. One of the other prophets, not a new one. Why? Well, John the Baptist, a couple chapters before this in Matthew 14, was imprisoned and then beheaded. And so maybe people hadn't heard yet. I mean, news didn't travel as quickly as it does today, although I would think that most Jerusalem, if not the whole Judea region, would have known that John the Baptist was dead. But God had brought other people back from the dead, so maybe Jesus was John the Baptist raised from the dead. Elijah. Why would people think Elijah? Well, Elijah was taken from this world without dying. It's in 2 Kings chapter 1, I believe, or the early portion of 2 Kings, definitely. He was taken up in a whirlwind of fire and a chariot of fire and whatnot. And there were promises that Elijah would come back. It seems that John the Baptist was the spirit of Elijah, proclaiming things. It may still be possible that he might come back. He might be one of the two witnesses that Revelation mentions. There's some theories about that. No reason to be dogmatic about it, but it's possible. But why Jeremiah or one of the other prophets? I don't know. I don't know if there's any reason why they would have thought that Jeremiah or any of the other prophets were going to come back. But that's what people were thinking. And it's definitely because Jesus was speaking with so much authority and he was teaching with so much power and he did all these great miracles that only someone who was with God, from God, could have done. I mean, Nicodemus in John chapter 3 even says that we know you're from God because of all the stuff you do. So, the next thing I want to talk about is Peter and the rock. This is something that Catholics do use to support their notion that Peter was the first pope, and that's why they have popes and whatnot. It doesn't jive, though. Peter, if I remember correctly, is Petros, and rock is Petra. Now, they're close, yes, but basically he's saying, Peter, you're a stone. A very specific stone is what Petros means. Petra is more of a rocky outcropping, a solid foundation kind of thing, a big thing. And if Jesus is saying, I'm going to build my church on this rock, why build it on another person? Why not build it on yourself? Which, Jesus is called the chief cornerstone or the capstone, depending on how you translate that. Jesus is called the rock. So I really don't think he's referring to Peter here. I believe he's referring to the confession Peter gave that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of the living God. That's what he was going to build his church on. The next thing would be the gates of Hades will not overpower his church. Your translation might say the gates of hell will not. I can't think of the word now. But basically, the gates of hell would not succeed in wiping out the church, right? This passage, along with Daniel chapter 2, where the kingdom that God sets up which can fairly easily be shown timeline-wise with some other prophecies in Daniel, that it's when the Messiah was going to come the first time, which was when Jesus came the first time, that it would last forever. Um, it's this passage and those that really make me cringe when I hear the Mormons talking about how Joseph Smith had to restore the church and restore the gospel because prevail. That's it. The gates of hell will not prevail against my church. Um, if indeed the gospel and the true church had to be restored, then I would say that the gates of Hades did overpower the church. The gates of hell did prevail against the church, at least for a time. And with the way the prophecies are told, the way Jesus is speaking here, that's not a possibility, right? He was setting up his church. He was going to be there. It wouldn't fall. That's not to say that some people and some local churches, shall we say, wouldn't leave, wouldn't fall, wouldn't walk away from the gospel. Indeed, there are books in the New Testament that talk about, why are you leaving what we taught you? But that's those local churches. That's not the church in general. That's not the church as a whole doing it. So, the last thing, do not tell anyone that I'm the Messiah. Why? It's a valid question. Why? You're the Messiah. Why not tell the truth? Of course, he's not telling them to lie. He's just not telling them to be forthright with it, right? Don't just go out and say, hey, he's the Messiah. Excuse me. I think mostly it's because of the timing that we were talking about earlier, right? If this was getting out, I suppose there's a possibility that people would have started worshiping him and they wouldn't have killed him. But I think that's a really extremely small possibility. I think it's a lot more likely that if that had gotten out at that moment, he would have been killed quicker than he should have been and not in God's timing. Does that necessarily matter for salvation? I don't see why it would. I think that whether Christ died during Pentecost or Hanukkah or anything else would have been just as salvific as him dying during the Passover when he did, but it wouldn't have been nearly as symbolic and within God's timing, right? And God's timing is perfect, and there's nothing and no one that could thwart his plans to have his perfect timing. So, and so he probably still would have died during Passover, but why not tell them to just keep it hush for now, make it easy. Then onto that, we get to the Last Supper, and again, I don't know how much time there was between Peter's confession and the Last Supper, but this is definitely the last day or so of Christ's life. Okay. Now, as for when exactly this took place, as far as the day of the week, there's a few theories out there. Some people believe the Last Supper happened on Thursday, which means that Jesus would have been crucified on Friday and buried on Friday and then rose early Sunday morning. Some people think that the Last Supper happened on Wednesday, so there was the crucifixion on Thursday, and then he rose on Sunday, and then some people even think that it was on Tuesday, so the crucifixion was on Wednesday, and then he rose on Sunday. I was taught the Friday to Sunday. I don't really know if I would disagree with it or not. I've looked a little bit into the other theories. GotQuestions.org has an article on it. But I don't think it matters that much when he was killed. Because it's still all taking place kind of in the Passover season and whatnot. If he was killed on Monday, would it matter? Is his blood no good on Monday, but it's good on Friday or Thursday or Wednesday? No, it's good no matter what. It covers our sins no matter what. There were some predictions that he made. Before the supper, he says his time is near. He predicts his death. He also predicts his betrayal and who it would be. And then after the supper, um, I'm not positive as to if it was after he gave the communion or not, but it was definitely after the supper. He predicts Peter's denial, and of course Peter's like, "Oh, I'll never deny you." And lo and behold, the next, that later that night, and then early into the next morning, he denies Christ 3 times, just like Christ said he would. So, the meal. I thought this was important, even though it's a Jewish celebration, it's a Jewish meal. I still think it's important for Christians to know and understand. Um, I'm a big advocate for knowing and understanding the Old Testament so that you can more fully know and understand the New Testament. Of course, fully knowing and understanding the Bible or anything else for that matter is not quite possible on this side of heaven. I think we can know and understand a lot, but I don't think we're going to completely and fully know and understand everything, or maybe even anything. How some things work, sure, small things, but anyway. So we have what's called the Seder plate. Uh, what Seder means, I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have to look that up. But basically, we have the unleavened bread, right, which was, they made the bread without leaven in Egypt because they weren't going to have time for it to rise. So they didn't put any yeast in it to bake it. We have a lamb bone, which represents the sacrifice that was made the last night, and they painted the doors with the blood from that lamb. We have the salt water, represents the tears of the slaves. The charoset, I had to look that up for pronunciation. I didn't look up the meaning, but it's it says right there it's a mix of apples, cinnamon, nuts, and wine. Represents the mortar and the bricks that the slaves were making. The parsley, it's a spring vegetable, represents new life. Roasted egg represents life after Egypt. They got the bitter herbs that reminds them of the bitter times of slavery. So I guess I went out of order. I'm sure there's a better order to go through that in. And then, of course, there is wine, as you can see in the other picture. I think the wine stands for something, but I forget what. I had several pictures, and I was trying to decide which one to use for the meanings and whatnot, and I settled on this one, and then added the picture with the wine in it. Anyway, for Christians, I think there's also some meanings to this. Not quite the same, but close. And of course, the bread we know represents Christ's broken body on the cross, because Christ said as much. And the fact that there's no leaven in it, leaven can be allegorically tied to sin, and especially since sin sort of puffs us up, right, and makes us prideful, kind of like the bread gets puffy and rises. And so, without there being yeast or leaven in the bread, there's also then no sin in Christ, right? And then the wine or the grape juice, depending on which church you go to, I don't think it matters which one you use because it's the fruit of the vine and it's red. The Mormons use water. I know why it has to do with the no alcohol in their health dietary thing. Although they don't use grape juice. I forget. I had asked at one point in time, but I forget. But anyway, for us Christians, the wine represents Christ's blood shed on the cross for us, and he said in I think it's Luke. He said that it's the sign of the covenant or the new covenant. There's a minor variant there in the manuscripts. But Jeremiah 31:31 talks about a new covenant, so it would make sense to me that Christ is saying the new covenant. There's a variant in John 31:30 or Jeremiah 31:31 as well. I'll have to look into that. But either way, it's a sign of the covenant. Excuse me, the covenant that God is making with us, and that Christ is fulfilling. There's some other parts that I think could, be good for us Christians. Not saying we have to celebrate this holiday necessarily, but Could be fun, could be interesting, could be a good way to teach our kids about the Bible and show them this is why the Hebrews do it, the Jews, and this is why we do it. So, the lamb bone, it represents the sacrifice of the lamb. Jesus was the Lamb of God. The lamb was not to have its bones broken, for the meal, the Passover meal, the first Passover. The lamb was not to have the bones broken. Christ's bones weren't broken. They went to break them, but then they realized he was dead and they didn't need to break them. And we'll get into that here a little bit more, a little bit later. Also, well, I'll save that for later too, actually. But it has something to do with the bones not being broken. I'll tell you that much. Now, the bitter herbs, the cheroset, and the salt water, I think they can all represent sin and hardships in our life, and how being in sin, it's a bitter state. It's like being in slavery. It really is, especially anyone who is a recovering addict, whether it's drugs or alcohol or lust or anything else you could possibly be addicted to. Just how um, slave-like it can be. You're in chains and you're trying to get free, and you can't get away from it, right? Um, and of course, there's help out there, and I encourage you to find it. Um, get to there are ways to find some cheaper counselors, and then groups. Find a group, reach out to somebody, find someone you trust, ask for some help. I got help and I'm still struggling, but I'm moving forward, and it's because of him and because of those he's put in my life. So, and then the parsley and the egg, they both represent a new life, and that's our new life in Christ. So, now after this, Jesus had during the supper actually predicted that Judas would be the one to betray him, and of course we know that Judas was setting all this stuff up earlier as well. And so after Judas left to go do what he was going to do, and after the communion ordinance had been given, Jesus took the other disciples and he went to the Garden of Gethsemane. And this was a garden that he had gone to fairly often with them to teach, and he had some of them stop at kind of early in the garden, and he had three others, Peter, James, and John, which it said Peter and the sons of I forget. Anyway, it says the sons of someone, but it's obviously it is James and John. We know that from other passages. Sorry for forgetting. I was sick all last week, and I'm still kind of getting over it. But he took them a little further in, and then he had them stop and watch me while I pray, and he went on and prayed. And he prayed for this cup, what was about to happen to him, to go away. But that the Father's will be done on his own. He knew that it had to happen. But he was fully God and fully human, and so no doubt his human side at this point was screaming, "Don't do this! I don't want to be beaten. I don't want to die." But his godly side knew that this had to happen, and it was going to. And, after a while, he went back to the three, and they were asleep, and he woke them up and, "Can you not even watch for an hour?" And then he went back and prayed for some more, and I believe they fell asleep again. But anyway, then Judas comes with the soldiers and some of the temple guards from the Sanhedrin. And that's when the betrayal happens. Now, Judas betrays Jesus with a kiss. We see that in Luke 22:47-48. It's interesting. The verse of the day today, in a little thing I downloaded not too long ago, was a proverb, and it talks about how basically open criticism is trustworthy, or is better than hidden hidden love, and that the wounds of a friend are more trustworthy than the kiss of an enemy. Links pretty well to this. Um, was it a prophecy? Not necessarily, although I'm not a big believer in coincidence, at least when it comes to the scriptures. Um, in life, maybe not. Anyway, John 18, 4 through 9, we have an interesting situation going on here. The guards come up, and Jesus walks up to betray Jesus with a kiss, and Jesus said, "You betray the Son of Man with a kiss, Judas?" And he looks at the guards and he says, "Well, who are you looking for?" Saying, "We're looking for Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus says, "I am he." They actually stumble backwards and some fall to the ground. Why? Because of the power of Jesus, obviously. I mean, even if the words coming out didn't have a physical force to them, they had a mental force to them. Stunning them like, oh, he's just saying that, and it doesn't surprise me at all. But Peter then draws his sword and he cuts off the ear of Malchus, who's the high priest's slave servant. But then Jesus tells Peter to put his sword away, and he actually heals the ear of Malchus. And of course, you can see that the scriptures were kind of weaving in the stories together. And that's something I want to bring up real quick. A lot of people will look at the Gospels, not just this particular section, but all the Gospels, and they'll look for the similar stories, and then they'll nitpick, and they'll say, well, this one says one man, and this one says two, or something like that. And so therefore they're contradictory and they're wrong. No, they're not contradictory. This one doesn't say that only one man did it, and this one doesn't say that only two men did it. But rather, this author is focusing on the one, and this one wants to say that there was two, and they're doing that for different reasons. That doesn't mean they're contradictory. It just means they're focusing on different things for different reasons. Now, from there, we go on to the trials, and there's 4 trials that Jesus went through in a rather short period of time, because he was crucified, midday, give or take. Somewhere in there. So the first one was before the Sanhedrin. It was at nighttime, which was illegal. And that's not the only illegal thing of that one. They had people who weren't really witnesses, and they couldn't bring any real charges against Jesus. And of course, they charged him with blasphemy, but since he was actually God, it's not blasphemous. Then in the morning, they took him before Pilate. Pilate had no reason to find Jesus guilty. None whatsoever. He sent him to Herod. Herod, no, he had Jesus ridiculed and whatnot, but then he sent him back to Pilate because he didn't want to deal with all the political, stuff that would have gone on. So he's back in front of Pilate. Pilate, again, there's no reason to find Jesus guilty. He can't find it, and his wife is even saying, this is a powerful man, don't do anything. He's a good, powerful man, come on. But to try and appease the Jewish religious leaders, because they were saying that, you're no friend of Caesar, and yada yada, and Pilate had many dealings with the Jewish leaders where they complained to Caesar, and then Caesar got on his back. That's why he was in Jerusalem, actually, because he didn't deal with other places nearly as well as he should have, and so he got, punished for, and so he was trying to appease them so they wouldn't go back to Caesar and rat on him again, So he had Jesus scourged. They didn't think that was enough. And the scourging, I've heard the 40 lashes minus 1, so 39 lashes, because any more could possibly kill you. I've heard that the Romans didn't care how many times you were lashed, and they didn't care if you died. I've heard all sorts of things, but he was definitely scourged with various, various torturing devices. one of which was a cat of nine tails, which it had little metal balls in the leather strips that would soften up the flesh. It also had pieces of jagged bone, pieces of jagged potsherds, and other sharp things that would cut into the flesh, tear into it, rip it off. And so I could only imagine how Jesus' back looked after um, a few lashes with that. But the Jews didn't like that. It wasn't enough. They wanted him dead. He offered a prisoner release. We have bar Jesus and Jesus. What do you want? We would bar Jesus, even though he's a rapist and a murderer and yada yada yada. So bar Jesus was released, and finally Herod washes his hands. Let's go ahead. No, we can't crucify anyone. We're not allowed. I'm giving you permission. Crucify him. Okay. Um, not not exactly verbatim, but you get the idea. And I personally think that the Passion of the Christ scene, if you've seen that movie, I think I think the real flogging made that look like maybe PG-13 instead of an R. But that's my personal viewpoint on that. So, same with the Bible story and other various things. Now, Jesus, he was forced to carry his own cross to the place of crucifixion, which would have been heavy. Even if it was just the crossbeam, it would have been heavy. Matter of fact, he fell a few times, and the last time there was a man, Simon of Cyrene, who was kind of forced to help Jesus carry it. And maybe he wasn't completely forced, but anyway. Then Jesus was pierced through his hands and feet, and I have those in quotes. A lot of the artwork in the movies, they'll show him being pierced through the palms and through the top of the foot down with 3 nails. The Greek hand is really the whole forearm, and the foot is really the whole lower leg, I believe. And so, with that in mind, and with anatomy and some things, if you put a nail through the palm, it's going to tear up pretty quickly, and he's not going to stay on the cross. It seems more likely they put it in the wrist, where there's a lot of bones for it to hold on to. Very painful as well. Not that the palm wouldn't have been, but I think the wrist would have been a lot more painful. And then with the feet, I think it's more likely the ankles again, because it's a better anchoring spot. And the Romans, they knew how to torture and kill people at the same time. Just put it that way. And it would seem more likely to me that 4 nails were used instead of 3. But and he was probably naked. And of course, he had the crown of thorns that was shoved on his head. I don't know if that was still on his head when he got crucified or not, but it had been shoved on his head earlier. So I have to look into that and see. But pretty much everything that I've seen has him wearing the crown of thorns while on the cross. So, but it may be false too. Hollywood is not known for its historical facts, or scientific ones, for that matter. Now, there are 7 sayings of Jesus on the cross. Some of them rather deep and special, others deep and special to specific people. And I think they could all have a lot of importance to them too, and possibly references to the Old Testament. There's a good article again on Got Questions about the 7 sayings, and I think it'd be good to go and read those. I kind of read through it a little bit, just mainly to get the sayings. I do want to read through the article more carefully here in the future, though. So to start with, we have Matthew 27:46. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Or some translations, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. Which, that's Aramaic. It's in the Greek, using Greek letters, but Aramaic words. And it is translated into Greek, and of course in our Bibles into English. right after it, and it's my God, why have you forsaken me? Now this one's special because um, it's not Jesus really wondering, my God, why are you doing this? He knew why it was happening. What it was, though, is it James White gives this example, and I like it, but it's his. As far as I know, it's his anyway. Um, if I were to start singing or saying to you, "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound," I think a lot of you, maybe not the younger crowd, um, and maybe some of the younger crowd, would think of another song that has a few different lyrics in it down the road, or different chorus maybe, um, but it's a song, Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And some of you can go on and on and on, I'm sure. It's the same thing here. It's the beginning of Psalm 22, and I didn't mark it, but I bet I could flip to it real quick. The book of Psalms being a rather large book and kind of right in the middle, it's easy to find. So, yes, Psalm 22, From Suffering to Praise. For the choir director, according to the Deer of the Dawn, a Davidic psalm. Now, I have no idea what the Deer of the Dawn is or how the melody goes. Sorry, yeah. But and I don't want to read the whole thing just because it's fairly lengthy. It's a 31 verse, yeah, 31 verses. But it starts off, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Aramaic and Hebrew are very, very close, by the way, kind of like Spanish and Portuguese are close. So, but it starts off that way. And any Jewish person with an earshot, it's in the book of Psalms. And the book of Psalms was like a hymn book, a hymnal. Um, some of you may not know what that was or is, but it's a book with songs in it and has notes. So you can actually sit there and sing with the notes. For those of us who could read music and those of us who couldn't, we'd sort of sing along as best we could after hearing it. I was blessed with being able to read music at least for a bit. I don't know how much I could do it now, but I love singing the old hymns. And so, any Jewish person with an earshot who went to the synagogue when they're supposed to and whatnot, no doubt would have heard this psalm several times in their life. And they would have heard Jesus saying this. And of course, some of them, oh, he's calling for Elijah. Well, some of them may not know Aramaic. But I have no doubt in my mind, of course, that those religious leaders who were there, whether they were disciples of Jesus or not, because some of them were secretly and some of them weren't, they would have realized what he was doing, and they could have finished the rest of the psalm, no doubt, or at least part of it. The next saying is from Luke 23:34. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. I believe that this is a reference to those who are crucifying him and those who wanted him crucified. I heard someone talk about how it was referring to those of us who would be saved. I don't think that's a proper interpretation. I'd have to look at more of their arguments and see where they're coming from, but I really don't think it's correct. And so that one would be specific for them. The next one, Luke 23, verse 43, I tell you the truth, today you'll be with me in paradise. He was saying this to the thief next to him. He was crucified in between two thieves, and one of them was mocking and jeering him. Save us, Paul! He called down, fire on these people. I don't know if he said to call down fire on these people, but he did ask for Jesus to save them all, save all three of them. And he was mocking him, and the other one says, don't you realize this guy's innocent and we deserve what we're getting? And then Jesus says, you're going to be with me in paradise today, to the guy who was nice about it. And then, let's see, Luke 23:46, that one should probably be a little further down the list because it's probably one of the one of the last things that he said. But anyway, he says, "Father, in your hands I commit my spirit." Um, so obviously he's letting go. He's giving up. Again, I think that should be further down the list, but it looks like the the article went in gospel order, not necessarily in any sort of um, chronological order. Although it would be hard, I think, chronologically to figure out what was said when outside of where the Gospels put them. But I think that one should be second to last. Anyway, the next one, John 19:26 and 27. "Woman, here is your son." And then looking at the one he said was the son, "Here is your mother." Now this was Jesus talking to his mother, Mary, and to John, the disciple whom Jesus loved, the one who wrote the Gospel of John. He's basically telling John, "Take care of my mother." Now, Jesus had other half brothers and sisters because they didn't have the same dad. Jesus was miraculously conceived by the Holy Spirit, whereas his other siblings were conceived in the normal physical way by Joseph. So, John 19:28, "I am thirsty." I believe that does go back to the Old Testament. I don't know where. I'm sorry about that. It's in the article though, and that's when they give him the vinegar on the sponge and he spits it out too, I believe. But, and then finally, John 19:30, "It is finished," and then he breathed his last. And so it would make more sense to me if we had Luke down there. So, "Father, in your hands I commit my spirit," and then "it is finished," in a loud cry, by the way. Now the death of Jesus. Jesus was on the cross for about 6 hours, give or take. And there is a time issue here. People say it's a discrepancy. It's not. One of the authors is using Jewish timing, the other one's using Roman timing. That's why the hours seem off a little bit. Any study Bible worth its salt would tell you that. That's why it's just getting a good study Bible and reading the footnotes. And better yet, get a set of commentaries. Read the commentaries. I believe it's in Thessalonians, maybe. Study to show yourselves approved. Definitely a big thing for me, and something that I encourage any of my viewers and readers to do. The curtain was split from top to bottom, which is significant because it was a very big curtain and no one could have gotten up there. No human could have gotten up there and split it. It was split from top to bottom. The earth quaked, rocks split. It was dark for 3 hours. I had someone, it's a friend of a friend on Facebook, and we were going back and forth on some things with my friend. And they said, well, the Bible says it was dark for 3 days. No, the Bible doesn't say that. I don't remember how I responded. I don't think I responded at all. Actually, I left it. What I should have said, and what I would say now, is no, the Bible says it was dark for 3 hours. He was in the tomb for 3 days. And maybe you're getting me mixed up with the Mormons, because the Mormons teach, I don't know if it's in the Book of Mormon or the Doctrine and Covenants or what, but it teaches, probably in the Book of Mormon, it teaches that it was dark for 3 days. It was dark for 3 hours. Then some of the tombs were opened and many saints rose from the dead. Now this is not a zombie plague. It's not Resident Evil, The Walking Dead, etc., etc., etc. They rose, they were whole, they were human, and then of course they eventually died again. But and who knows how long they've been dead anyway. Long enough, I'm sure, to be dead. But and then there's this Roman centurion. It's not a Jew. May not have been a disciple of Christ, at least not until that moment, but he says this man really was God's son because he had seen, the darkness, felt the earthquake, and all this stuff going on. What in the world? Maybe not the tombs opening and maybe not the split curtain, but he definitely saw and felt, the sun darkening, the earth quaking, etc. Sorry. I would say the swoon theory doesn't work. For those of you who don't know, the swoon theory basically states that, well, Jesus didn't really die on the cross. He just he passed out, he swooned, and they thought he was dead. First of all, Jesus was flogged, bleeding pretty badly. Very quickly, he was nailed to a cross. On the cross, you normally die of asphyxiation. And, he would have been standing up for a bit. It took a while to die on a cross unless you broke the person's legs, which is what they did a little bit later. Um, so you're hanging there with your knees bent, you can't breathe. You push up, it's painful, even more so than just hanging there, but you can breathe. No doubt, Jesus, having some things he was saying on the cross, was pushing himself up to get a breath and speak, which probably would have reopened the wounds on his back or made them worse or whatever. And then going back down again, any possible scabbing being ripped off. And then when he does die, which, let me go back a little bit to the breaking of legs thing, and this is where we talk about the lamb bone not being broken. The religious leaders, it was the Sabbath, it was Passover, they didn't want the bodies on the cross, and not just Jesus's, but the other guys as well. And they asked if they could go, if the guards would go break the legs so that they would die more quickly, which is actually kind of merciful, considering how long it could have been up there. And so they go and they break the legs of the thieves. But then they go to break the legs of Jesus, and they look and, oh, he's dead. Not only that, one of the Roman guards, centurion maybe, took a spear and shoved it through the rib cage into the heart just to make sure. It's, I believe there's a piercing of the side in the Old Testament somewhere. And when he pulled it out, there was, like blood and water coming out, which obviously it wasn't water. He broke the pericardium, which it would have looked like blood and water coming out. It's a medical thing. I should have looked that up in a little more detail. You can look it up, though, fairly simply. So the swoon theory just does not work. Not to mention, going on to Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, they were both part of the Sanhedrin, both disciples of Jesus in secret, at least until then. I'm sure that word got out later. They went to Pilate, asked for Jesus' body. I'm sure Pilate took a little bit to get some permission, and they went back. And Nicodemus brought 75 pounds of herbs and spices and aloe and whatnot to put on the body. They wrapped Jesus in a linen cloth, and they took him to an unused tomb, and the women followed. Now, even if you're just unconscious, if you're somehow still alive, being smothered in that much myrrh and aloe and whatnot, and then wrapped in a cloth, I don't think you're going to survive very long in that. And then, of course, being in a dark, dank tomb for a while. Now, the Shroud of Turin, I don't know how I feel about the Shroud of Turin. I've seen some good presentations on why it's legitimate. I've seen some good presentations on why it's not. I'm not dogmatic about it, and I don't think you should be either. But it does give us an idea of how the body was wrapped, and there's some interesting videos out there. I would suggest looking into it if you have the time and if you think it's important. Obviously, if the Shroud of Turin could be proven to be the burial cloth of Christ, I think it would do more harm than good. Those who don't believe, the bulk, if not all of them, still wouldn't believe anyway. Some might. B, though, I think there are a lot of people who do believe that would start worshiping the shroud in a way, being reverent to it in a way that is not necessarily right or healthy. Okay, I think it's interesting, and you know me, I like to bring up things that I think are interesting, even if there's controversy around them. I'm not dogmatic about it, but anyway, it's still debated, and I haven't made a decision one way or the other, and I probably never will. Um, but it's interesting. I think it's only worth looking into because it's interesting, not because it's salvific in any way, shape, or form. So we do know a larger piece of cloth was used. It wasn't, the strips. It wasn't wrappings like the Egyptian mummies. Um, yeah, they might have used a couple strips to tie the hands together and the feet together to make sure the body stayed put, and tied something around to keep the jaw up, kind of like Bob Marley in the Christmas Carol, the older one anyway. Um, but we also know they did it, well, they used the 75 pounds of spices or myrrh and aloes, and they did it quickly because of the Sabbath, right? Because of Sabbath laws and all that stuff, they wanted to get it done quickly and out of the way. Not to be irreverent, but just to try and be reverent and yet efficient and quick. That's why the women went and got more spices and whatnot when they could before the Sabbath, possibly after another Sabbath, depending on which day of the week you think he was crucified, etc. Because apparently they didn't think that Joseph and Nicodemus did a good job. Right. Then we move on to the resurrection, and as I said, the women brought more spices. It was very early Sunday morning when they went. They were wondering about how they were going to roll the stone away, but they walked and it was rolled away. Now the stone had been sealed. They had a seal on it so people could know not to open it, and if it had been opened and reclosed, they could tell that the seal was broken. It also had some guards around. But when they got there, the stone had been rolled away. I think the guards had left. There were angels there that said, why are you looking for the living among the dead? He has risen. Jesus was mistaken for a gardener. Again, we're looking at all four gospel stories here, and kind of piecing together what had been going on. And of course, they were like, where have they taken him? We don't know where they've taken him. And of course, they were distraught. They were crying. It's hard to see through your tears, and maybe if you didn't open your eyes. So it's no wonder that they didn't notice it was him until he spoke. He told them to go tell his brothers where to meet him, which was in Galilee, I believe. And they went and told him. Those men, they didn't believe the women. Men can be very chauvinistic, I will tell you that. I typically trust people unless I have a reason to, and a valid reason, not just a superficial one. Anyway, Peter and John both run towards the tomb, and John beats Peter because John's a little bit younger, or quite a bit younger than Peter, probably. John doesn't go in, though. He kind of looks in, and I don't know why he didn't go in, but he didn't. Not yet. Peter goes in, and Peter sees things, and then finally John comes in, and he sees the cloth laying there and whatnot. They saw and believed he had risen, but they didn't quite understand. So they went back to the rest of the group. Now, I believe it was a couple days later, the 11, no, Judas was dead. So the 10, because Thomas wasn't with them, it's not that he stopped believing or whatever, but he wasn't with them for that particular dinner. But Jesus returned to them. And of course, they go and tell Thomas after they had dinner and whatnot. Thomas is like, well, I'm not going to believe unless I can see him and put my hand in his wounds. And then they're having dinner again, and Thomas is there, and Jesus shows up again. And he shows himself to Thomas and says, "Here." Now, the painting, that's an artist's rendition, obviously, and the Bible doesn't say that Thomas actually touched him. He could have, but the Bible doesn't say he did. I don't think it matters one way or the other, to be honest. But then Thomas says, "My Lord and my God," both directed at Jesus, by the way. Uh, the Muslims will try and say that Muslims and others that don't believe that Jesus is actually God will say that Thomas was saying, "My Lord, my God." But no, in the Greek and in the English, it's very clear. The "and" ties Lord and God together to the same subject, which is obviously Jesus. Um, and of course, Jesus says, "Blessed are you who believe, even more blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe," which would be the bulk of Christianity down the ages. And don't Thomas gets a bad rap. Yeah, doubting Thomas. He's a realist. He's an evidentialist. He was willing to go be killed with Jesus in Jerusalem when he went up there. And I believe it's traditional that Thomas went towards India after all this stuff took place, and he was kind of a missionary there. I don't know the stories much. I'll have to look into it some more, but I believe that's what tradition teaches. Anyway, Jesus, that is, also appeared to many, many people, 500 disciples at the same time, a couple of disciples on the road to Emmaus. He appeared to his half-brother James. Now, James had completely doubted Jesus the entire time of his ministry. No doubt James saw his brother killed. Well, maybe I shouldn't say no doubt. The Bible doesn't say he was there. I don't know of any other source that says he was there, but he obviously knew that his brother had been killed. And of course, growing up with Jesus, he doubted. But then Jesus showed up after James knew he had been killed. Then James believed, became a disciple, wrote the book of James, led the council in Acts 15, which was held in Jerusalem. Another reason not to think that Peter was the first pope. And then eventually, after his ascension, he appeared to Paul, who was called Saul and then became Paul. And Paul wrote the bulk of the New Testament. And again, this was after Jesus' ascension, and I don't think it was a physical appearance, at least not in the sense that he was appearing to all the other disciples, all the other people. So now, some of you are probably thinking, wait, you said this was about the last month and a half of Jesus' life on earth, and you said that you weren't certain when Peter made his confession. We definitely started with like the last day or so before Jesus died. So how can this be a month and a half? Well, there's Jesus' ascension. I don't know how many people think about this that much, but something hit me a while back. And that's that Jesus was on this earth for 40 days before he ascended. And how do we know that? Well, it's because of Acts 1, verse 3. After he had suffered, he also presented himself alive to them by many convincing proofs, appearing to them during 40 days and speaking about the kingdom of God. This, to me, defeats the hallucination theory, which says that all the disciples were hallucinating that Jesus had risen from the dead. Well, first of all, there were 500 plus of them that saw him. Mass hallucinations are extremely difficult, especially if you're trying to make them be the same hallucination. And then for 40 days, were they hallucinating for 40 days that he had risen? And if he hadn't, why not show them the body? Of course, they couldn't find the body, so that's why people say, oh, they stole the body. If they stole the body, why were they dying for what they were preaching? I had a friend who said, well, it's easy to die for something when you think you're going to be in heaven for it, but if they knew it was a lie, why would they die for it? Because they knew that lying wouldn't get them into heaven. They even preached as much in their books. God hates liars. In some of the lists of people who will not inherit the kingdom of heaven, liars are mentioned twice in one list. Actually, I think there are two lists that mention liars twice. I could be wrong on that, don't hold me to it, but there's at least one. I know that. And again, why die for something that you know is a lie? Doesn't make sense. Of course, there are people, well, I think only the Muslims will argue this way. I'm not 100% positive on that, but I know that through listening to Dr. James White quite a bit, the Muslims do use this one quite a bit, and it's because the Quran says it, says that somebody else died in Jesus' place, or that Jesus didn't actually die. So in some way, shape, or form, God took Jesus off the cross, or switched him out with maybe Judas or somebody else, or maybe even just a fake image. And of course, that's all based on the Quran saying that, and this isn't about the Quran, obviously, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But I do believe that it has been and can be defended and shown that the Quran is not the Word of God. So, and if a Muslim sees this and you want to have me defend that position, you're going to have to give me some time because I need to really prepare for that. I'm more of someone who shows why Christianity is true and talks about that. I haven't looked much into why other religions aren't true, but I put my trust in other people who have done those studies. um, so, anyway, there may be some other theories on why the crucifixion, resurrection, etc. didn't happen, but this video is not about that. It's about the story. So, there's one thing that I want to finish this week off with. That is John 21:25. It's the very last verse of John's Gospel, and I want to utilize it. So, and there are also many other things that Jesus did, which, if they were written one by one, I suppose not even the world itself could contain the books that would be written. That is to say, just like in the Gospel of John, I only have so much time and space, especially for this particular presentation and for all the presentations combined. I eventually hope to get a lot more in-depth on things and more videos up, more blogs up. But since Jesus is God, and the prologue of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Skipping on to verse 14, the Word became flesh. That means that Jesus goes back to creation, and we see other passages of how Jesus created everything and he holds everything together, just like the Father does. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, all one, working together, etc. And so, obviously, I'm not going to be able to tell everything that they did outside the Bible. I may not even be able to do it, with the stuff that's inside the Bible. Who knows how much longer Christianity here in the United States is going to be legal, acceptable, at least my version of Christianity. which I believe is the true version, and I'm not the only one with it, obviously. Um, and I'm not saying that I'm 100% correct. Um, but there are groups that claim to be Christians that don't follow the Bible. And I think that they will be accepted. I don't think true Bible believers will be. Those that hold to there's a God, He created us, the Bible is His word, the Bible is true, His laws are right, so these things are sin. Those kinds of Christians. Um, and you know what I mean by those things, by these things. Um, I don't think that we'll be allowed to be open and public with our ministry. I'm sure many of us still will be, and we'll pay the price. But we'll see where that goes. So I want to use this to say that there's a lot more that I could have talked about, and I'm trying to do some broad strokes of my own, as I said earlier in the video. So I would encourage you, read the Gospels. I think you should start with John. If you are a religious Jew, maybe you should start with Matthew. Matthew was specifically written to Jews, and it deals a lot with the Old Testament and quotes and whatnot. Quoting from the Septuagint mostly, I believe, the Greek version of the Tanakh. But anyway, and then read the other Gospels as well, no matter which one you start with. And if you want to start with Mark or Luke, go ahead. And then read your Bible daily. I believe it's a very important thing to do. I'm working on trying to do it more in a relational, personal way than the academic way that I've been doing it. Not that the academic way is bad, but it's not as spiritually healthy for me. So, you know, and with that, we're going to end this evening. Next week, we'll be jumping into the book of Acts, kind of going through the early history of the church. And then I still need to figure out how I'm going to do the epistles, focusing on some of the important parts, and then we'll end with Revelation. I know that. And again, if you want to support me, the biggest thing is prayer. Pray that I am able to do all my studies, because I did just start school this week, going back to finish my Bachelor of Theology. I started a new job. I'm going to start volunteering more at the church. So I'm going to have a lot on my plate. If you could just pray that I will hold it together and I will do justice to God and His Word through these videos and blogs, I'd appreciate that. Giving this video a thumbs up and a share is appreciated. If you like it. If you don't like it, don't give it a thumbs up and don't share it. I hope you won't thumbs down it, but that's your prerogative. If you would like to give financially, there's some ways on my website. Just go to bradnediger.com, go to ministry tab, and then support us underneath that tab. You can buy stuff through Amazon, I'll get a commission. You could buy some leaning products, I'll get a commission. You could donate, but I can't give you a tax receipt. I haven't been able to work on the 501c3 status. And if you have already donated, I haven't really looked to see what's been going on. I haven't gotten any emails either. But I'll try and check on that before the next meeting here. First Tuesday of next month, which is the first of the month, day 1, November 1st. I'll try and check on that, so if anyone has, I can thank them. And so if you have, and I don't want to be rude, I just haven't looked, and I'm sorry about that. I do thank you if you have. So, and from there we will go. I will see you, God willing, in a couple weeks. God bless.